All right. Well, it's about that time. I know we should probably get started here. Renee, are we good? All
Yes.
right, I'm recording. I'm gonna take that as a yes. Hello, everybody. Miju mataha nakang Mason Estes yaka na unakta La Hoyangay. My name is Mason Estes. I'm La Jolla Ben Liseño from Broomfield, Colorado. I'm currently a third-year student at the University of Denver, and I am going to be your host this evening uh, here at the Spirit of the Sons of the Soil of the Sun of the People Transformative Indigenous Youth webinar series. Um, Thank you again for coming. I appreciate everyone taking the time to be here. Uh, Co-presenting with me tonight, I have Jaden. Jaden, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, my name's Jaden. I'm part of the Blackfeet, Arapaho, Cherokee tribes. I'm also Vietnamese and Hispanic. I go to Arvada West High School. I'm a junior, and I'm a volunteer for Spirit of the Sun. Pretty dope.
Awesome. Jaden, thank you again so much for being here. I know at school and everything and how crazy everything is being online. Taking the time to do this means a lot to us that you'll be here and helping us out. So we just wanted to welcome everybody back to week number 2 of building on the movement of this webinar series that really is made, designed, and led by youth from our community. This webinar series is meant to provide us a platform where people from our communities, people who come from our struggles can all unite under one time and one place and all sit together and have meaningful discussions about next steps in our communities. This is a 4-part webinar series that we started last week, so this is our week 2. We have 2 more sections of the webinar series for October 13th and October 20th. Next week, we're going to have presenter Leela Poyer, local community activist, an amazing spirit, amazing voice, come in and talk to us about the original protectors. But this week, we're going to talk a little bit about building on the movement. But Jaden?
Yes, bring your friends. We want to spread this message to as many people as possible. So, and we're really promoting allyship, especially in this webinar, like this part of the webinar. So please bring people, spread the message. It's important.
Of course, in this webinar series and the messages that we really want to talk about and these dialogues that we want to have with people, the impact of this message amplifies the more people we have in the conversation, the more voices that we bring in, and the more stories that we get to hear. And that's why today it is so important for us to be having these conversations across communities, across identities, and we appreciate all of you guys for being here today and taking the time. So tonight, we're going to be talking about building on the movement, talking about how the struggles that we all come from and experience in our own lifetimes, how they relate to each other, and how identity and how the stories of us as individual people are very related. But talking about building on the movement consists of 3 main ideas, all that we'll explore here tonight with the help of our wonderful presenter, Deja Brooks. These 3 points are that our struggles are not the same. This is a key point to make when we're talking about struggles between different communities that may not be experiencing the same types of effects of imperialism or neo-imperialism or colonization or poverty or these different things that impact our communities. We don't experience them all the same way, but our struggles are all valuable in and of themselves. And hearing the different aspects of these struggles is one of the more important things that we can have in these dialogues. Liberation from these different oppressive systems, whether it's imperialism, colonization, patriarchy, or racism, can only be achieved through collaboration. That this is, for lack of a better way of saying it, a team sport. That there is no way to achieve the progress of one people without trying to fight for the liberation and the well-being of all communities. And through this collaboration, we work together to forge new paths forward. A bit of a reiterating what we just said, that our struggles are not the same. That is a conversation that is difficult to have when you bring a lot of different perspectives in together, that a lot of times people speak for, oh, people of color, and say that in a very broad context, or they say specifically, oh, in Indian country or in the indigenous community. A lot of broad terms get thrown around, but they're not done so in a way that, not often done so in a way that is trying to diminish the experiences of individuals. But we want to make sure that we're identifying in this conversation that we're having tonight that all of our struggles are not the same. None of us can speak for everybody, but we can all agree that each one of our fights as individuals, as communities, as peoples across the world and within this country, within the state of Colorado, and within the city of Denver are all important. There is no fight that we are having and experiencing that isn't as important as any of the others. Liberation can only be achieved through collaboration. This is back to this point that if every fight is equal in importance, then we all have to agree that collaboration on these issues is the only way for us to achieve the success as individuals, as communities, that we hope to see. And through doing that, hopefully we can collaborate and make these new paths forward, come up with innovative ideas. It's the basic concept of, two minds are better than one, but if we combine the united efforts of whole communities, the potential that's there. So to go into this a little bit further about the idea of cross-community collaboration, the understanding of different experiences outside of the context of Indigenous people, we have Student Body Vice President of the University of Denver, African Students United member, one of my best friends I've made in college, and so happy and honored to have here today, Miss Deja Brooks. Deja, welcome, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to talk with you all. Yeah, this is something I'm really passionate about, not only as Student Body Vice President, but just as a person. Being an activist, collaborating with others, I'm a people person and I love hearing different people's experiences. And like Mason said, we all have different paths, we all have different journeys and things that we go through to get to where we are, but at one point or another, our paths will cross and we can kind of work together. So I'm really happy to be talking to y'all.
Wonderful. Dej, I'm gonna take off the screen share right now and let you go on.
Yes, and I will go ahead and start screen sharing. I made a short little presentation just so that, pictures. I'm a big picture person, so can y'all see my Black activism in today's world screen?
Yes, we can. And before we get started, one of our attendees today, Caleb Monroe, we appreciate you being here. And anybody else who has comments or anything you guys want to throw in while we go, please put in the chat any questions or any topics that we'd like to have during the discussion period after the presentation. We want to get to all of them. We want to hear from all of you. But no, please put anything, any ideas, any thoughts that you have within the chat. We'd appreciate that so much. But all right, Dej, take it away.
Awesome. Yeah, so thank you, Mason, for that introduction. Like Mason just said, I am DU's undergraduate student body vice president. I'm also a member of the African Students United on campus, also a member of the Black Students Alliance on campus, BSA. And I'm originally from Tulsa, Oklahoma, so that's actually where I am right now. I moved to Colorado 2 years ago to come to school, and kind of dove into the world from there. So my presentation today is really going to be kind of on activism, what it means to be an activist, kind of how I got started, and how can our paths cross, how can we as people, build one another up and really bring that bigger voice to the table. So my first thing today that I want to start out with was, what is activism? The question that was posed to me is, why is it important to be an activist today? And I'm a big person on definition. The only way for me to know why it's important is for me to know what it is. So the first thing that I did was look up the actual definition, of what is an activist. And, this is just one definition from the Straight Up Dictionary. So there's plenty of others. Everyone has their own, but the dictionary version of an activist is a person who uses or supports strong actions such as public protest in support of or opposition to one side of a controversial issue. And like I said, that is just the textbook version. Activism comes in so many ways, comes in so many fashions, and it can be anything. I don't think controversial issue is the only thing that it comes down to. I think it comes down to, where are your morals driving you? Where are you as a person trying to help others in your community? Where are you trying to do better for those around you, your neighbors, your brothers, your sisters? It's not just what's your ice cream flavor. It's more of a who are you, what do you stand for kind of situation. And another thing that I knew is activism doesn't always come in the same 3 or 4 ways. I mean, we hear about protests, but you have those protests and you have the people that are marching in the streets, and they are just as effective as anyone else, because you also have those people that are making actual billboards and posters and social media content. They're just as much as an activism as those that are using their bodies, their voice, their form to be an activist. Personally, I'm a person that likes to use my body to be an activist. Later on, I'll tell you all how I've danced for 15 plus years, and how that's kind of where my mood and my drive comes from, is my want to dance. But I want to make sure that, the question why is it important to be an activist comes down to each and every person. We all have our different motivations. We all have our different reasons that we go to the places that we go to, and we drive what we drive. I want to be an activist because I think it's important to help those before me and after me that couldn't do it. I'm privileged in the fact that I have this voice, I have this mode to talk with people and to express my story, but not everyone does. And just saying that, go out and speak to people, because everyone has something to say. It just takes that one question of, do you want to talk to me, to get people moving and motivated. So that's kind of my spiel on why is it important to be an activist. It's important because we are all humans. We are all living this life, and we're all striving to be not only a better version of ourselves for our family, but also a better version of ourselves for our community, to build our communities up, to show that, we may have been oppressed in the past, we may have had our struggles, and we're trying to move forward. We're doing everything in our power to better our families. And I think that's really the drive of, why be an activist today, putting your voice out there, getting everything together. But I'll kind of tell you all a little bit about my activist journey. So activism to me started at a very young age. I'm 20 now, and I started being an activist in this sense when I was about 11-ish years old. Like I said, I've been dancing classical ballet for about 15 years, and I didn't realize, always knew it. I realized it very young when I realized I was the only Black girl in any of my ballet classes ever. But I never realized how cut off and siloed the African American community was from the arts until I went to my little cousin's school, and I was walking around with her, and I was telling her I'm going to ballet class, and she's like, what's ballet? Like, genuinely no clue. And I was like, how can you not know what ballet is? Like, this has been a big part of my life forever. And so I started telling her about it, and little 11-year-old me didn't know a clue as to what is happening. So then later on, I go and ask my mom, Mom, why doesn't Kayla know about being a ballet, like what ballet is? And she says, well, she straight up said she couldn't afford it. And I was like, I never thought about that. I never processed that, I had that privilege in the moment. And after that, I started asking my mom, well, can I teach girls how to dance ballet? And my mom was like, if this is what you want to do, this is what we're going to do. And I went to my local park, which just happened to have a ballet program that was starting up. And my mom had gone to high school with the teacher that was starting it. And she said, you know what, you can be my demonstrator. And that's how my journey got started from there. I went on to start a 501c3 with a local school. It's called Latimer Cooksey Foundation. That's just one of the pictures from it. And that's another, as you can see, we're in the basement of the school. It's a low-income private school, or low-income charter school for the African-American community here. So we worked with what we had. That's the cafeteria / classroom / dance room in the moment. So it's very much coming from the ground up. I was the only dance teacher for 4 years at Latimer Cooksey. It was completely volunteer-based because they couldn't afford anything. The bars that you see in the corner over here, my mom and I made those myself, came out of pocket because the girls needed a bar and there was no other way to do it. So, we picked up some pipe and we said, let's do it. And it's just things like that, just wanting to give to others what I had, and, giving in a way that may at the time seemed just like a small thing. But in reality, like, this made a lot of these girls' year. Like, this was their only time to learn about the arts. This was their only time to hear, a dance instructor say, you know what, if you want to be a ballerina, you can. Because no one else was telling these girls this. They hadn't heard it from their parents. They hadn't heard it from their friends, hadn't heard it from their aunts and uncles, because it wasn't a thing in the community. And I started that when I was 14. And now 4 years later, there was a second dance teacher that came on. They taught hip hop. So there was now a hip hop and a ballet program. And it's soaring now. I started out with 4 girls, and now I think they're up to 25. So it's a completely free for the girls. Everything's funded for them, from their leotards and tights to the actual class itself. We ended up getting a bunch of grants, which is amazing. So that's really where my activism started for me. And it continued through this program called the Oklahoma Center for Community and Justice, or OCCJ as I call it. And it is pretty much this random group of people, as you can see here, just people from all walks of life, people from all sexual orientations, people from all diversity mindsets, coming together and just having a conversation like this. We all brought different thoughts, we all brought different beliefs, we all brought different ideologies, and we just sat down and we talked about, how can our difference make our community better? How can we work together to support one another rather than tearing one another down? How can we work together to see the progress that we have, and how can we move that progress forward? Because without those conversations, it's just not going to be had. So we spent a lot of time, recognizing what we had done in the past, what we as individuals are doing right now, and what we can do as a community together in the future. And everyone you see in that picture has gone off to completely different walks of life. In that picture, you have doctors. In that picture, you have a lawyer. You have some church ministers, and you even have a couple of individuals that ultimately found themselves in the penile system. But you know what? Like, we still came together and we still had those conversations, because it's an important thing to have, to talk about those things that may be different from you, to talk about your wants, your drives, but also how can my neighbor and I come together to talk about that? Because I don't look like my neighbor, I don't sound like my neighbor, I don't even think like my neighbor. But what is our connecting factor? We have crossed our paths, we are right next to each other in this moment. What is something that we can do to walk hand in hand to be better for tomorrow? How can we show that we are different, but we can build that united front? How can we grab our other neighbor's hand and say, let's continue this path so that we can all be together? And that's kind of where OCCJ came in for me, and really opened my mind to a lot of things that I never even thought about. Because, I went here when I was 17. I would have told you in the moment, I am the most diverse, most know everything person that I could have been at 17. But it was a week-long camp, and after that, I came back and saying, you know what, I really don't know anything. Like, it truly, truly humbled me to want to get to know people more and not just assume. That was one big thing that I made the mistake of doing before, was just assume that I know someone's path, assume I know what they're going through from face value. But in reality, you have to talk. Like this whole version of activism, everything in activism is about talking. You can't just sit back and be silent. Talking comes in all different forms too, whether that be painting, dancing, singing. I mean, you can draw, create. Any way that you talk, that's a you thing, but you can't just sit down and say, like, not do anything, like stare at a blank wall, stare at paint drying. You're not going to get anywhere. You have to kind of push yourself and say, you know what, how can I communicate what's going to happen? How can I talk to these people? And that once that conversation gets rolling, you notice that so many other things start to fall into place and so many other visions start to come into fruition. And you see where visions line up and you see where visions don't line up, and you see how the misalignments can slowly become alignments to help both parties. And I think that's really, really important as you kind of move on. But to kind of answer another big question and topic of today's conversation is kind of this community relations portion. You know, how can one community help another? How can we come together to be one collective group? So one big philosophy that I'm a big believer in is that, you know, communities have to work together. We are separate entities, separate people, separate ideologies and beliefs, but the only way, you know, you can create a true change is if you have a line that's forging the front, that's there to be your barrier. And you can't just do that with 3 or 4 people. And as much as, you know, I would love that, I think it would be great. You know, you have to have your neighbors that you may not ever talk to. You have to have that community that you may not have known anything about to really see that change. You have to step out of your comfort zone almost. So in that kind of idea of stepping out of your comfort zone, you know, I had to do my research just to come here. I had to figure out, you know, what are some pressing like issues that the Indigenous community face, because, you know, I'm not a part of the community, so I may not, like, I really didn't know. And just upon my research, you know, I realized we have similar problems, but they're not the same. They're by no means the same. They're almost parallel lines. You know, you have your struggle, and the African American communities has ours, and they don't really cross necessarily, but at the top of almost all parallel lines, they'll eventually start to weave until they meet a top. So, you know, the Indigenous community, just for my research, you have impoverishment and unemployment. And from my experience as an African American, we have that exact same thing. You know, the Indigenous community has that suppression of voter registration. The African American community has that same thing. And while we're looking at them through our own lenses, we're looking at them through, you know, what we see in the moment, we can look at them together. And like I said, it's a conversation that has to happen. And to really help one another, we have to be okay stepping outside of our comfort zones and having difficult conversations. Because if we have those difficult conversations, ultimately it's going to be what enhances us as people. You know, we can sit and we can talk about, you know, oh, like the African American community, you know, we have generational incarceration, we have, you know, fatherless children, we have this, we have that, but we're only seeing it from our point of view. We're not seeing it from anyone else's point of view. And similarly, you know, if we ask, you know, an Indigenous individual, you know, what do you see the African American community struggling with? What do you see the Black community having a hard time with? And, you know, their answers are going to be very different than, you know, I just listed out. They're going to be like, oh, like, here's what we see. And it's the alignment, the idea is just going to be so different. And without hearing what someone else has to say about, you know, what's going on in your community, what changes can occur, you'll never know. Because without that kind of stringent line of communication, it just goes nowhere. So one of the things that I realized as I was researching and I was like thinking about what to say The first thing that came to my mind was an interaction I had this past June, when all of the protests were going on. Like I said, I'm from Tulsa, Oklahoma, so many of you may have heard of the Tulsa Race Massacre. That was a big part of my childhood. I had a relative, my great-great-grandmother was alive when the Tulsa Race Massacre occurred, so hearing stories from when I was a child about, what that was like for her was very relevant for me, but I never knew that other individuals other than the Black community were affected by this. And this was my life up until a couple months ago. We were having a protest that coincided with Black Lives Matter, and there was Oklahoma has a very large population of indigenous peoples, and the population came and just showed out. I mean, there were people from all of the different nations we have, and just they were representing themselves to the best that I think they could have. I mean, it was amazing just to see the support that was out there. And one of the girls that I was walking with, she just so happened to ask me, she was like, why are there natives here? And I was like, I don't know, like, why don't we go ask? And so I walked up to one of the individuals and I said, hi, I just want to hear your story. And I mean, this man and I, we sat down and we literally sat on a bridge and talked for an hour and a half. And it was just one of those most eye-opening experiences. He told me about, his story growing up in the 90s, not really having a hard time finding himself, who he was as a Native person living in what was then and still kind of is a drug-ridden town, trying to find his identity as a gay individual, and just how that affected his own beliefs, how it affected, the way his community saw him. And all of that just kind of shook me to my core. I was like, wow. And then Tulsa Race Massacre came up, and he told me about, how his family was affected during that. And I was like, what? What are you talking about? I always assumed that this was the genocide of, the Black Wall Street. And he was like, no, I have family members that, because the African Americans moved out of their communities, moved into ours. And I never had processed that. And just sitting there and listening to his story and him asking me questions about my life and my story, I realized how much we connected. And this was just a random person I met off the street. It wasn't someone that I had just purposely gone up to and you with a preconceived idea in my head. I was like, you're going to tell me why you're here, this, that, and the other. No, I just went into it with an open mind. And I feel like that's one thing that we as a society kind of have a hard time doing. We have a hard time going into things with just a complete blank slate. We always have a preconceived idea, whether that be an implicit bias that we may have, or whether that just be something that, you've learned from childhood, so you think that it's like that. But I try my best to be as blank as possible when going into situations like that, because you never know what you're going to get. And this interaction definitely taught me that it's more than what meets the eye. Talking to people can lead to so much more than just a frivolous interaction. It leads to so much more than just, he told me about his life story of being a gay indigenous individual who didn't know how to make his way through life. But now I'm telling you all his story, and just that connection and the friendship that we now have. I mean, I went and had lunch and coffee with his family him and his family not too long ago. And yes, the connections that were built from that, it shows how just taking that step forward, taking that step to have that communication it goes such a long way. So I'll wrap up because, I don't want to keep anyone too long, but one quote that has stuck out with me throughout my entire life, my grandma was the first one to tell me this quote, and I did not know it wasn't a quote from my grandma until I was 15 or 16, so I was a little embarrassed when I found out it was not a quote from my grandma. It's actually a quote from Maya Angelou. It says, "You may not control the events that happen to you, but you can decide not to be reduced by them." And that quote is just something that constantly sticks out to me throughout everything that I do. We may not know the things that are going to get thrown at us. We can't control what our friends may say. We can't control the actions of the government. We can't control the actions of anyone. But we can let them not get us down. We can overcome them. We can think of it in a positive light. We can try and flip the switch and say, you know what, this was supposed to get me down, but I'm not letting it tear me apart. I'm going to come over it. I'm going to build on top of it, and I'm going to show that I can be even higher. This quote is something that has gotten me through some of my darkest moments, because it's just one of those things that you think, you know what, I am so low. I'm just so beaten up. I'm so down. And you can take this and put it in the aspect of your communities. Like, you know what, your community may be in a low point. They may be in a point that you're like, there's no coming back from this. But if you take it and you're like, but let's talk to the community next door. Let's talk to the group next door that also looks like they're struggling. You're taking that and you're putting the power into your hands. You're putting it and you're saying, let's try and fight this battle together. Let's walk together. Let's figure out the best ways that we can become the group and the individuals and the community that we want to be, and not letting our situation and what's going on to us make us any less. And yeah, that's kind of all I had. So thank you everyone for listening to me just kind of go off and talk on a tangent and go everywhere. But the moral of the story is just, communication and having an open mind and just talk to people, because all of our stories are going to forge together. So thank you.
Go off, Dave. Thank you so much. Absolutely amazing. Wonderful. And for all of our participants here tonight that weren't here last week, we're just going to wrap up here, and then we're going to stop the recording, and then we're going to move into our period discussion. A lot of the points you brought up, Dej, are fascinating, because we can really build a great discussion off them, and I really want to get your perspective on a few things. But for all of our people on Facebook Live and all the people who get their hands on this recording down the line, appreciate you all taking the time to watch and hear our perspectives and our stories. Thank you again, Deja Brooks, for coming in and speaking to us tonight. Your insight is always so valued, always so appreciated. Next week, we will be having Leela Poyer, a community member, activist, someone whose opinion I respect equally as much as Deja's and Brianna Bailey's from our first week's presentation. Leela is going to come in and talk to us a little bit about how we are decolonizing our identity and what this means in terms of the environment and environmental activism. Another lane that is vital to the agency of Indigenous people existing in the world. And Leela is going to talk to us a little bit about the intersections between Indigenous identity and environmental activism. We'll be back here again at 7:30, same time with the same registration, and we urge you all to keep coming back. Our series is 4 parts, 4 weeks, and just because this is week 2, not all of them are sequential. A lot of them are, the ideas that we're talking about are individual to each week. So you can miss this one or miss the last one and still come to week 3 and you're up to speed. And we thank you all so much for coming. Jaden, do you want to give a final note about the Bring Your Friends?
Yes, bring people. We need people. This Deja, oh man, I can't wait to the discussion. But people need to hear this. We really do need to start engaging with each other more and learning from each other, because there are 7 billion people on this planet, right? And I feel like only 1,000 of them know how to listen. So maybe we got to change that.
100% for sure. And no, we urge all of you guys watching, whether Facebook Live or from this recording, please register with tiny.cc/SOTS webinar. Please feel free to fill that out and come next week. And we'll see you all next Tuesday. And have a wonderful night. Okay. We'll stop the